looking for a transporter.
You know what kind of a transporter will you need if shit hits the fan? This kind of a transporter. But let's start from the beginning. With a budget under 10,000 euros, you can easily get this Audi A8, which still has many interesting features and qualities. And let's not forget that it was featured in the two Transporter movies, so maybe after watching them you thought, damn, I would like to have one. But is it really worth it? Let's find out. The interior of this car doesn't have much issues. I mean, the build quality is really good. The optional front seats are comfortable and adjustable in every way. All the switches are where they should be and the ergonomics is okay, even though there is a big amount of buttons on the MMI panel, which can be confusing. But the MMI multimedia system itself still works kind of okay, even though it's nowadays outdated, obviously. And then there are some interesting features this car can have, like the fingerprint sensor for driver's profiles, solar sunroof, a fridge with glasses even for your beverage, or the Bang & Olufsen sound system with those little pop-up speakers in the dash. But all of this is just a small part of the optional equipment. Most of the used materials are durable, so the interior of these cars is usually in a good condition. However, there are some weak spots like the buttons on the driver's side door panel. Basically all the buttons there can be worn, plus the MMI center button can wear out more often too. The small storage door on the driver's side lower dash can interestingly deform over time, and the small plastic trim on the optional front seats can fall out. For more additional information about the interior, visit my website. The body of this A8 is made entirely from aluminium, which is great since it's not gonna rust like the regular steel. However, the aluminium can corrode as well, even though not that easily, and there are a couple of weak spots on the body. So be prepared that mainly on cars used on winter salty roads, the tailgate trim corrosion is a pretty common optical flaw. Over time, the lower door trim inner steel part is gonna rust from the inside and thus deforming the trim itself. Cases of chipping and bubbling paint on the black triangular trim on the rear doors are not uncommon, and lastly, check for corrosion bubbles, mainly around the windscreen. This A8 has numerous more common possible issues, so let's start with the MMI screen opening mechanism, which will fail at some point because of the broken plastic gears. To fix this, you can buy aftermarket metallic gears and replace them. Then mainly the inner taillights are more prone to fading, cracks and water leaks. And it doesn't matter if you have the older lights or the newer facelifted versions, it's all same shit. The water will obviously ruin the electronics in them, so if your lights are still okay, then you should at least preventively remove them and put silicone on the edges. The outer taillights can have issues with cracks and water leaks too, but not that often. Next, the individual LEDs in these taillights can fail as well. A new taillight is f***ing expensive, but luckily it is possible to replace the individual LEDs in them. But still, whoever let these lights into production should be fired. Interestingly, the hood release cables are known to snap, so it's good to preventively replace all of them because you won't be able to open the hood very easily if they fail. After this, check the electric tailgate, which can have often issues with opening or closing. Then there is the rear window, which can delaminate. Now, this is interesting since this A8 can be equipped with either a regular rear window, which is usually fine, or it can have the optional double glazed solar window, which has very thin, barely visible heating lines. And this special window can fog up or delaminate, in other words. This not only looks like shit, but it will also cause that the window defroster won't work. Issues with the not working ABS and ESP systems are not uncommon either. This can be caused by a faulty ABS module, a faulty brake light switch, or by a faulty ABS speed sensor. After this, it's worth to check the AC system properly, since the blower motor is gonna fail sooner or later, and there are also cases of failed heater valves, causing the AC to get stuck on cold or hot. Plus, on older cars, the little servo motors for the air flaps under the dash can break. Then there is the electronic steering lock, which can fail, and in this case you won't be able to start the car. But for more information about this, check out my video about this specific issue. On cars used during cold winters, it's also good to check properly the windscreen wipers, since the mechanism can seize up because of rust. Last but not least, before buying, check for fault codes with an OBD scanner and check all the electronics properly, since all this usual shit can break more often too. And don't forget to check the electronic parking brake. Listen, I'm not saying that all of this shit will inevitably break, and it's definitely not gonna break at the same time, but keep in mind that this is a complex car. Shit breaks, and issues with battery draining are not uncommon either, so for more information about these problems and for useful links, visit my website. To minimize the electronic issues, keep the battery and the alternator in good condition, and most importantly, keep the interior bone fucking dry, so pay attention to water leaks into the interior. There are basically three sources of water leaks. First of all, there are the scuttle drains, which are buried deep down under the windscreen plastic scuttle panel, specifically under the blower motor housing. Long story short, they can be clogged, which will cause water accumulating in this area, which will destroy the blower motor and the blower regulator, plus it will obviously leak into the interior and into the expensive electronic modules, and destroy them as well. Then there are the front and rear sunroof water drains, which can be clogged and let the water in as well. The front sunroof drains endings are behind the wheel well liners, so first clean these endings and use some edge trimmer line as well. But to clean the rear drains, you will have to remove the rear side parts of the headliner. Lastly, there are two AC drains under the dash. One is on the driver's side and one is on the passenger side. Keep in mind that they can also get clogged and leak water, but luckily you don't need tools to reach them, so visit my website for useful links and clean them. This A8 is standardly equipped with the adaptive air suspension, which is all great and awesome, but the air compressor is gonna wear out. The air struts can start to leak anytime basically, and it's definitely a good idea to check and eventually lubricate the link rod ball joints of the height sensors, since they will seize up over time. But let's go back to the air struts. If the suspension lowers overnight, then your air struts are leaking, and if they fail completely, then you will end up with a barely drivable lowrider, but you have a couple of choices how to fix this. Whatever you choose, keep in mind that the original air struts have a weak point, which is related to this air valve inlet piece. Long story short, if you are using the car on winter salty roads, then this place will sooner or later start to corrode and later even crack, causing an air leak. Then be ready that the upper control arms and drop links can be easily worn even before 150,000 kilometers, so check them visually and check for clunking, knocking or rattling noises from the suspension. But check all the other control arms too, since after 200,000 or 250,000 kilometers, the lower control arms can be worn as well. Next, you should definitely listen for strange humming or rumbling noise which will increase with speed, since this indicates worn wheel bearings which can be more often worn too. Lastly, this car was available with the standard steel brakes and the more powerful versions also with the optional carbon ceramic brakes. These special brakes can usually withstand more than 200,000 kilometers, but replacing them is fucking expensive, so as usual avoid cars with them unless it's a low mileage car, the brakes were replaced recently, or unless you are ready to convert these brakes to conventional steel brakes. Before I start rambling about all the petrol engines, I have to mention a very common problem related to the coolant reservoir, which can leak coolant. Specifically, this connection can crack, so be prepared to replace the coolant tank if it was not replaced in the past. From the petrol engines, the most reasonable choice is the 4.2-liter V8 with 335 horsepower. The reliability of this older engine is not that bad, so with proper maintenance it can last a long time, even though it has a couple of specific issues. First of all, the intake manifold plastic linkage will break at some point, but you can buy aftermarket metallic linkages. Next, The cam chain tensioners can be worn usually after 200,000 or 230,000 kilometers, which is not positive since you can end up with bent valves and shit if you don't replace them in time. And lastly, there is the infamous oil cooler, or in other words, oil filter housing pipe leak. Long story short, a small plastic coolant pipe will crack and leak coolant, and fixing this is not the easiest job. The 3.7 liter V8 engine can have the exact same issues as this 4.2 liter V8, so I'm not gonna mention this unit anymore. Now let's move on to the second most reasonable choice, which is surprisingly the 6 liter W12. This engine doesn't have any major problems, so with proper maintenance it can last a long time as well. But you should definitely keep a bigger amount of money for the maintenance of this unit, since there is no space around the engine, so replacing certain parts or fixing some leaks will require either a lot of disassembling and a bit of creativity, or removing the whole engine completely without being creative. And what about the other engines? Well, if we take into consideration the power, the complexity, and the reliability of these engines, then they are not really worth it. But let's check them out anyway. The 3 liter V6 is essentially not the worst engine in the world, but I would avoid it since it is rare and not very powerful, and it can have more of an issues I can't be bothered to mention. After this, there are only the newer direct injection engines. They can have more of an issues with faulty injectors, carbon buildup, faulty camshaft adjustment solenoids or leaking seals on them, plus there are also the high pressure fuel pumps which will leak or eventually fail. The 2.8 liter FSI and the 3.2 liter FSI are actually not bad engines, so except the usual direct injection issues, leaking high pressure fuel pump and some other leaks, they are usually fine. On the other side, the 4.2 liter FSI can have issues with the direct injection related stuff and also with the intake manifold plastic flaps which will get stuck, break and fall apart usually after 200,000 kilometers or 250,000 kilometers. Plus there are two electric flap actuators which can fail too. Then various oil leaks are also gonna appear on various spots of this engine, and to fix some of them you have to remove the whole engine. Last but not least, there is the fantastic S8 version, which has a fantastic 5.2 liter V10 FSI engine, which can have fantastic issues. Again, the damn direct injection related issues are gonna occur. But let's move on, because there is again the complex variable intake manifold which will have the same issues as described earlier. But in this case it can fail usually earlier, so even at around 100,000 kilometers. That's why before buying it's good to open the hood and check for a rattling noise from the intake manifold, mostly from 1000 up to 1500 RPM. This rattle indicates excessive play or broken bits in the intake manifold flap mechanism. Obviously, oil leaks are gonna sooner or later appear on this engine as well, so in this case you have to be also ready to remove the whole fucking engine to fix some of them. But this is absolutely not the end, since this engine has 4 catalytic converters and 8 O2 sensors, which is awesome since all of this shit is gonna break, mainly if you have leaking injectors. And the funniest thing is that because of the lack of space, you have to remove the engine to replace all the O2 sensors. Also, because of the lack of space, replacing other certain parts will require either a lot of disassembling around the engine or removing the whole engine completely. I would like to finally end this, but there is a bonus issue related to excessive oil consumption, which can be caused by the damaged cylinder walls. All in all, a reasonable amount of oil consumption is acceptable, but if your engine consumes 1 liter of oil every 1000 kilometers, then there is a very high chance that the cylinder walls are damaged. From the diesel engines, the most reasonable choice is the 3 liter TDI, but the 4.2 liter TDI is not a bad engine either, mainly if you have a bit more money for the repairs. Both of these units can easily reach 400,000 kilometers or 500,000 kilometers, however, they will have some issues. First, there are the variable intake manifold flaps which can fail. The flaps can be stuck, loose, or the actuator motors can be faulty. Then on the 3-liter TDI, it's also good to check and eventually replace the crankshaft pulley, mainly in cars which were used on winter salty roads, since over time the inner part of the pulley will rust out and separate from the outer part. In this case, the accessory belt will jump off, so this will obviously leave you stranded. Next, the injectors can be faulty on both of these engines, but usually just after 200,000 kilometers. Of course, they can last way over 300,000 kilometers as well, but this depends on many different things. One of the signs of faulty injectors is this kind of a slightly bouncing idle when the engine is warmed up. Of course, oil leaks are also gonna occur, but mostly after 200,000 kilometers or 300,000 kilometers. And because of the lack of space, they are more expensive to fix on the 4.2-liter TDI. Lastly, the turbochargers are also gonna fail, but usually just in high mileage cars. But on more abused cars, obviously earlier. Replacing the turbocharger on the 3-liter TDI is not hard, but the 4.2-liter V8 has two turbochargers on the side of the engine, so to replace them you have to remove the whole fucking engine. And that's all for these engines. But what about the older 4-liter TDI V8? Well, I would not recommend it, and I can't be bothered to tell you exactly why and the issues it can have, so for more information about this particular engine and the reasons why it's bad, visit my website. Plus keep in mind that the coolant tank can crack and leak coolant even in cars with the diesel engines. All the engines are equipped with timing chains except the older 3-liter V6, 3.7-liter V8 and 4.2-liter V8 petrol engines, which have timing belts, which you should change every 120,000 kilometers. On the other side, the timing chain mechanism is usually fine, at least up to approximately 300,000 kilometers. However, sometimes it can get worn even earlier, mainly the tensioners, but mostly on the petrol engines and in the 4-liter V8 diesel engine. So, all in all, check for a short rattle at cold start and keep in mind that you have to remove the whole engine to change that damn chain mechanism. This A8 can be equipped with two types of automatic transmissions. Most of these cars are equipped with the regular 6-speed Tiptronic, which is mostly reliable. However, after approximately 250,000 kilometers, the torque converter can be more worn, mainly if the previous owner never changed the gearbox fluid. Plus, if you are buying the more powerful S8, W12 or the diesel V8 models, then keep in mind that they are more prone to have issues with the gearbox, mainly because of the more enthusiastic driving style of the owners, lack of oil changes, and because of the bigger stress on the gearbox caused by these more powerful engines. Then there is the more rare Multitronic CVT gearbox, which is still not very reliable, although with regular oil changes and with a regular, not aggressive driving style, it should withstand 200,000 kilometers. But of course, after this mileage point, the lifetime of the gearbox starts to be questionable. Most of these cars are equipped with Quattro, which is still that good old school mechanical and reliable 4-wheel drive system, so it usually doesn't have issues even in high mileage cars. Although it's of course good to occasionally at least change the oil in the front and rear differentials, because mainly in the S8, W12 or V8 diesel engine models they are under a bigger stress, so they can get worn and develop noises. Lastly, it's pretty damn important to check the power steering fluid level regularly and also replace the fluid to at least minimize issues with the power steering system. Since there are more cases of worn power steering pumps causing whining noises, plus leaking steering racks and leaking power steering hoses can occur too. To summarize things up, the most reliable and the most reasonable engines are the older 4.2-liter V8 petrol and the 3-liter TDI diesel engines. But if you have more money for the repairs, then the W12 petrol engine or the 4.2-liter TDI are pretty damn good choices as well. Obviously, if you have enough money or you can fix the car yourself, then you can buy whatever you want, even an S8 with monkeys and gnomes inside. But it's not really worth it, as I said. Then as usual, find a good independent mechanic and keep approximately 5,000 euros for the possible repairs. If you have personal experience with this car or more information about it, then you can write it into comments.